The following is intended for informational purposes only. It is intended to supplement classroom training and documentation. It should not be relied on as a replacement or substitute for classroom training with a live expert instructor. Welcome to Lesson 8, Understanding Exceptions, Versions and Logs. Here we'll be looking at a form, creating a form based upon the form type that we have created in earlier sections, and then going through a few different examples where it'd be important to look at the form set exceptions, where there's some errors, and where there are versions because there have been changes to the form, and also looking at the logs. And we will see how we can interpret the life cycle and understand what's going on by looking at the tabs of the exceptions, versions, and logs, which gives us information as to what exactly happened. Now we're going to create a new form, and as we do so, we're going to see how the form works together with the form logs, form versions, and exceptions. So, as we always do, I'm going to create a new tax form. And the first thing I'm going to do is put some information in here. Make up a name. Let's do something simple. And let's make a mistake over here. We save this. As we go through creating this form, I just want to look at the three tabs at the top: exceptions, versions, and logs, so that we understand what's happening. First of all, if we look at the log, we will see that we have, every time we do an action, generally we log information, tells me who does it, created in status pending. Makes sense. There's no exceptions yet. There are no errors. Okay, so I'm not going to find anything there, and there's no versions yet in the system either. The next thing I'm going to do is, I don't know. Before we do anything, let's move it to edit. Does that and put in a DLN number. Once we edit it, we haven't actually, it's still in pending form, so we don't expect to have any more logs, and there are no versions yet either. Okay, now the very first time we should expect something to happen, therefore, is if I hit validate. And when I hit validate, we get an error. We get an exception. The exception list is shown over here. Shows me the status is suspended, and it shows me a validation error, the default form change reason. If I look at my start off by looking at the log, we can see what actually happened. First of all, initial form version was created. Whenever you move from pending, it creates a initial form version, and it was transitioned to validate. It tells me the transitions, and then transitioned to suspended because we had a form rule error. And the reason why it was transitioned to suspended is because the form rule, we'll look at in a minute, has moves it to suspended. And when we actually move it to form suspended, it creates another. It actually creates a form version. So if I look at my versions now, you would expect to have two. One for the initial one. This shows you the initial form version in the pending. And if I click here, I have the one now in the status of suspended. Exceptions over here, we will expect to see the suspension, the particular form rules which created this suspension. And the reason because the exception class is suspense, and terminated stopped and put it in the suspense status. Not every status has a form version, and if I looked at the business object of the tax form, of the parent tax form, if I look at the particular statuses, I can look at, for example, the suspended status, and if I go down, you will see that option type. There's an option type over here which has also enable versions equals yes, and that's the reason why I have a version when I move into the suspense state. Okay, so because I moved into the suspense state, I now have another version. Now what happens now if I try to correct this version? So the first thing I'm going to do is just go edit, and it will now move it into the we'll see what happens now if I now change my personal details and change it to something else, so that I have a unique ID. The form is saved now still in the suspended form, but I've made a change now. I've made a change to the form, and if you look in the log, I've created a new version. I'm still in suspense, but form suspense status, but because I've created a change, I now have another form version, and the details here are different. If I go over here, if I go into the personal details, you'll see the ID number has changed, as opposed to number 2 will have the old one. Okay. Now, let's see if I can validate that. I expect it to have an error based upon the information here, but let's see what happens. The form is still in the suspense, but it has a different error. If I look at this, the log first of all, let's see what happened. What happened was it was transitioned to the validated state again, but went back to suspense and created 2 form versions as a result. One of them as it entered the suspense state, and the other one with a particular exception. Let's have a look at the versions that were created. The last 2 versions that were created were this one here. If I look into the details here, it shows you the value over there. And it actually shows another one as well. If I look at the exceptions, we have 2 exceptions, right? One was the initial one, which has now been is now closed because this one has been fixed, but there is still one which is open, which is the one which I have now on the line details, on the tax details section. Okay, now let's us carry on and now go into edit. And now I'm going to make a change to my tax details and fix this. Remembering to change this to correction over here and put the right value here. It's actually 110,000. Let me save. Now, once I've done that, it's still in the suspense state, but we should have seen that we just created ourselves another log, another form version. That's another form version I just created as a result of changing the form to 110,000. So if I look at this one, you will see that this is now changed to 110,000. Okay, so you see the idea. Now let's click validate, and hopefully this exception list will be removed. So now it's ready for posting. We will see in the log that it's transitioned to validate, and this time it didn't go to suspense, it went to ready for posting. If I go to my exceptions, you will see that now both of these are closed, and therefore that's why in the main section over here you don't see the exception anymore. Finally, if I do a re-edit, I'm moving it into the status of edit, and I could actually make another change. Let's say I make another change over here, and I put my withholding amount here of a change reason again I need to have. The re-edit state that I'm in now, re-edited state, will also show you that you created a form of a version. Okay, and you'll have a new version as well in here, because again, the re-edited state is enabled for versioning. Okay, so for each one of these particular states that is set for enable versions, you will create a version. You also have one for the very initial version. And then finally, let's just post our form, validate. And post. And the person is now created. If I look at my log, you will see that all this information of every time I create an entity, everything is logged. So there the primary taxpayer is created, count created, tax roll, obligation, each one of the items was created. When it was transitioned to post, it didn't create a new version, and that's because versioning is not set for that, for the posted state. Okay, so this is how the exceptions, versions, and logs work, and that's basically it. So what have we learned in this lesson? We've seen the usage of exceptions, versions, and logs. Important to know that versions are not necessarily used whenever you move to any different status. In fact, if you go to the parent tax form, you will see that there is an option type saying whether you enable versions, and it's only those particular statuses where you will create a version for, and not necessarily for every single status that you move to. For example, if you move to the posting state, it doesn't automatically create a version. Again, unless you make a change and then it moves to a different status, and those statuses therefore have versions, that's when versions will be created. So it might be worth looking at the parent tax form to see how that works. The exceptions show you a history of all past errors. So even after you've completed the form and no errors are shown, exceptions is a place where you could go and you see the history of all the closed exceptions and see what happened. And if there was an issue with a particular form, you can see the history of what happened. Similarly as well with logs. Logs give you a general change of any different information that's happened throughout the life cycle of the form. Whenever there's a change to a different state, it will show it. If things have been created as a result or cancelled, that should be shown on the log. So it's a good place to go to be able to sort of understand what has happened with the life cycle of a form.